At 3:07 a.m., Moscow time, the Kremlin was engulfed in smoke and fire. Less than 7 minutes earlier, an unstoppable weapon had been launched from NATO territory. Immediately, the entire world entered the highest level of nuclear alert. This was not a test. This was not a warning. This was a deliberate retaliation strike, an action that pushed both superpowers to the brink of total annihilation. How did two nations, bound by the doctrine of mutually assured destruction, arrive at this unthinkable decision? What happened in those terrifying 7 minutes that turned simmering tension into open war? This video is a hypothetical analysis, closely following current geopolitical flashpoints and the rise of hypersonic weapons. We will explore a dark scenario: Russia's lightning strike on a NATO command center, and America's devastating decapitation response. We will analyze the weapon that delivered this unstoppable strike, a long-range hypersonic missile known as the Dark Eagle. We will also dissect the cold, calculated decisions made inside situation rooms, from Washington to Moscow. To understand the scale of this impending catastrophe, let's break it down second by second. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because you won't want to miss any detail about the doctrines shaping our future. 2:45 a.m. at a secret NATO command and control facility near Rzeszów, Poland. This location, just a few dozen miles from the Ukrainian border, was not a frontline base. It was the brain where U.S. logistics and intelligence specialists coordinated the flow of weapons and critical data to Kyiv. They felt safe. After all, this was NATO territory, protected under Article 5. But that sense of safety was merely an illusion about to collapse. At the same time, hundreds of miles to the north, at a mobile launch platform hidden deep in the forests of Kaliningrad, a Russian launch crew was completing final checks. They didn't know the exact target. They only knew it was high value. An order had been authenticated from the highest command level in Moscow. Their weapon was not an ordinary cruise missile. It was the Oresnik, a new hypersonic glide weapon designed to evade every existing defense system. At 2:50 a.m., a thunderous roar tore through the Kaliningrad night. The launch was flawless. The Oresnik missile shot into the atmosphere, rapidly reaching unbelievable speeds. Almost immediately, U.S. Patriot batteries and NATO Aegis Ashore systems in Poland and Romania detected it. Radar screens lit up and alarms blared, but detection did not mean interception. At Mach 8+, with an unpredictable glide trajectory, the Oresnik turned the West's most advanced defenses into helpless spectators. NATO's decision loop, the time from detection to firing, was completely broken. They saw the threat, but they couldn't calculate an intercept point. The missile plunged toward Rzeszów before a single interceptor could leave its launcher. At 2:57 a.m., the command and control base in Rzeszów was wiped out in a blinding explosion. More than 200 NATO personnel, technicians, intelligence analysts, and several senior U.S. Army officers were killed instantly. This was a deliberate strike, an action meant to cripple NATO's logistical nerve center supporting Ukraine. 9 p.m. Washington time. Everything was normal at the White House, until National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan burst into the Oval Office without knocking. The air in the room instantly thickened. "Mr. President," his voice tightened, "we've lost Rzeszów." It was the Oresnik. The Russians killed our commanders on NATO soil. Silence fell. This wasn't a skirmish on the Ukrainian front line. This was a direct attack on a NATO member state that killed American service members. This was a calculated escalation. Russian military leadership believed they were applying a sophisticated doctrine: escalate to de-escalate. They believed that by carrying out a lightning-fast, Devastating but non-nuclear strike on a clearly military target, they would shock NATO. They believed that Washington and Brussels, faced with the harsh truth that their defenses had been pierced, would freeze, fear further escalation, and be forced to back down, accepting negotiations on Moscow's terms. But they miscalculated a fatal mistake. They severely underestimated Washington's response. For the U.S. president, this was not some complex tactical maneuver. This was an unjustifiable act of war. A blatant violation, an assault, no different from a punch straight to the face. In the underground White House Situation Room, the atmosphere was ice cold. Tactical nuclear retaliation options were presented but dismissed immediately. Doing so would be suicidal. Doing nothing would be surrender. They needed a proportional response. A response that sent a clear message: the United States cannot be attacked without consequence. Only one non-nuclear option remained, one with equivalent strategic weight. An option that violated every unwritten rule of the post-Cold War era. An option called Dark Eagle. Would the U.S. president dare to give the order? The White House Situation Room felt as cold as a tomb. President Donald Trump stared directly at Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. Every option was terrible. Ignoring the attack on Rzeszów would mean admitting that NATO's Article 5 was just a worthless piece of paper. Nuclear retaliation, even tactical, would trigger the apocalypse instantly. They killed our troops on NATO soil, the president said, his voice hard and resolute. They think we'll back down because we fear escalation. They miscalculated. He paused, staring at the real-time map. They need to understand that we can reach anywhere. They need to see that they are not safe, not even in their safest places. He nodded, approving Response Package 4NA. Send the message. Response Package 4 NA had only one target, not a submarine base, not an air base, but the Kremlin itself, the symbol of Russian state power. 3 a.m. local time in Poland. At a U.S. Army Typhoon launcher site, carefully camouflaged beneath thick tree cover, the launch crew received the encrypted sequence. They were professional soldiers who had rehearsed this procedure hundreds of times. But this time, the display showed green, not the yellow of simulation mode. The commander's voice in the headset was cold and without a trace of emotion. The order has been authenticated by Supreme Command. This is not a drill. Target. Kremlin. Estimated flight time: 7 minutes. Execute. A deafening roar tore through the quiet Polish night. The long-range LRHW hypersonic missile codenamed Dark Eagle was launched. It carried no nuclear warhead. It didn't need one. It carried an advanced kinetic penetrator warhead designed to destroy the most fortified targets through sheer velocity and a massive conventional explosive charge. Russia's Voronezh DM early warning radar system, deep inside its territory, detected the launch. Red alerts blared across the Moscow region, but detection did not mean interception. At Mach 5+, with an unpredictable glide trajectory, the Dark Eagle rendered Russia's pride, its S-400 and S-500 Prometheus air defense systems, completely helpless. They were designed to counter bombers and ballistic missiles flying along predictable parabolic trajectories. They were not designed to counter a glide weapon capable of changing direction within the atmosphere. The S-400 batteries around Moscow opened fire. They launched volleys of 48 N-6 missiles, drawing desperate streaks of light across the night sky, but they were trying to hit a bullet with another bullet, while that bullet was maneuvering at nearly 3,700 miles per hour. Inside the Kremlin, chaos erupted. President Vladimir Putin was rushed by FSO guards into the fortified command bunker buried deep beneath the complex. The final point defense system, the A-135 AMUR, was activated. It fired into the sky, but it was already too late. Why the Kremlin? Why not the Russian Ministry of Defense or a military base? This was the U.S. multi-domain operations doctrine combined with game theory. The U.S. military needed to prove one thing, that it could penetrate Russia's densest A2 AD bubble. By striking the heart of the command apparatus, the ultimate symbol of Russian power, the U.S. sent a message. You are not safe anywhere, not even at home. It was the ultimate deterrent strike, a non-nuclear message delivered with nuclear-level weight. 3:07 a.m. 7 minutes had passed. The Dark Eagle missile plunged downward. It did not detonate on the surface. Its kinetic warhead pierced the domed roof of the Senate Palace, tore through multiple layers of reinforced concrete, and exploded deep inside, causing catastrophic internal collapse. The message was delivered clear and blood-chilling. The Kremlin, the symbol of Russian power for 500 years, was burning. The entire world held its breath. The retaliation was complete. But what would Russia do next, when cornered and seeing its supreme symbol of authority under attack? Were their fingers now hovering over the nuclear launch keys? The Moscow-Washington hotline, the direct line meant to prevent apocalypse, was completely silent. No one dared pick it up. Inside the Kremlin, smoke, dust, and panic filled the air. Russia's hardened command and control systems were still temporarily paralyzed. The strike had happened and ended in just 7 minutes. A single question hung in the suffocating air of the command bunkers. Was this a lone, punitive strike a bloody message? Or was it the opening shot of an impending full-scale nuclear attack? Their early warning systems scanned the skies for signs of hundreds of incoming U.S. ICBMs. But there was nothing, only terrifying silence. Beyond the Ural Mountains, inside a hardened backup command bunker, Russia's remaining leadership faced an unthinkable decision. The Russian president, physically safe but boiling with fury, looked at his generals. They had been humiliated, their symbol of power violated. The first and most obvious option under their military doctrine was full nuclear retaliation, activating the PDMEC, the so-called dead hand, and accepting mutual destruction. But they did not launch. Why? Why would a nation proud of its nuclear might accept such a blow? Because the Dark Eagle strike was non-nuclear and Washington had calculated coldly. They deliberately sent a signal. We can reach you anytime, anywhere. But we do not wish to destroy the world. If Moscow launched its ICBMs, the Pentagon would immediately retaliate with its full nuclear arsenal. Stealth B-21 Raider bombers carrying precision-guided nuclear B-60 on a -13 warheads would be deployed. Both sides stared into the abyss and both stepped back. The nuclear front fell silent, but the conflict exploded inside the United Nations Security Council. The emergency meeting unfolded in unprecedented hostility. The Russian ambassador slammed the table, calling it an act of state terrorism, a declaration of war. But U.S. Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield responded calmly, her voice cold as steel. "Let us be clear," she stated. This was a targeted, proportional response to the unlawful and unprovoked attack by the Russian Federation on NATO personnel and territory at Rzeszów. She emphasized, "We used conventional weapons. We did not target civilians. We targeted the machinery that makes war decisions." It was Moscow that chose this path of escalation. But stepping back from the nuclear brink did not mean the war was over. It merely shifted into another domain, one far more silent and far more devastating. Unable to retaliate with missiles without committing suicide, Russia launched the largest cyber attack in history. Power grids across Texas flickered, then went dark. The financial system in Fort Worth froze for 6 hours, causing trillions of dollars in damage. This was total warfare. In orbit, the war began as well. Anti-satellite ASAT weapons from both Russia and the United States were activated. GPS satellites, the backbone of the modern economy and military, became hunted targets. the world suddenly went blind. And the war was no longer just between Russia and the United States. In the South China Sea, a Chinese J-20 stealth fighter pilot received a new directive from ground command. The coordinates of a U.S. F-35, once just a tracking target hours before, had turned red. He was ordered to support a strategic ally. He locked onto the target. The conflict was no longer a regional war in Europe. It was spreading globally like an uncontrollable wildfire. The strike on the Kremlin did not end the war. It simply shredded every rule. It opened a new chapter, a world without treaties, without red lines. A world where hypersonic weapons and cyber warfare determine the fate of nations. So, who truly won in those decisive 7 minutes? And in this new shadow war, what does humanity have left to lose? The global power structure, already fragile, had completely collapsed. The Kremlin did not completely fall, but the scars it suffered, both physical and symbolic, were irreparable. The myth of an impenetrable fortress was erased in just 7 minutes. Meanwhile, the crater left behind in Rzeszów, Poland, was a chilling reminder. A reminder of NATO's deadly vulnerability against a generation of hypersonic weapons that nothing can stop. No ceasefire was signed, no peace talks were convened. There was only a tense pause, barely breathable. Both Washington and Moscow pulled back, hiding behind defensive systems to assess the damage and plan their next moves. The new Cold War that many had predicted had officially begun. But it was no longer cold. It was hotter than ever, driven by the speed of cyber warfare and the brutality of hypersonic weapons. Smaller nations around the world were now forced to choose a side. Neutrality died with the first victims of the war. As military technology outpaced diplomacy, tragedy became inevitable. The 7-minute flight of Dark Eagle proved a terrifying truth. Humanity has built weapons faster than its own wisdom. We have entered an era where a world war could begin and end in under an hour. The biggest questions remain unanswered. Is this the end of conventional warfare? Are major cities from New York to Shanghai now permanent hostages to unstoppable weapons? And when the dust settles, will anyone be rational enough to realize there are no winners, only survivors? What do you think of this scenario? Was the U.S. president's decision a reasonable and necessary response to defend NATO? Leave your analytical thoughts below.